It was the summer of 2020, the height of the pandemic. Travel was sparse, but I had a good reason to be on the road that night. My sister had just given birth, and I was on my way back home from visiting her in Austin. I live in Denver, so it was a long haul, and I decided to split the drive over 2 days. I didn't plan the stop particularly well. I just figured I'd find a cheap motel off the highway when I got tired. Somewhere in northern Texas, my gas tank was running dangerously low, so I took the next exit that had a sign for a 24-hour gas station. It was the kind of place you see in horror movies: dimly lit pumps, a flickering neon sign, and one car parked on the side of the building. The convenience store looked closed, but the pumps were still operational, so I figured I'd fill up and move on. It was well past midnight, and the road had been eerily quiet. I told myself I was just paranoid from exhaustion. After all, it was just a gas station. As I pulled up to the pump, I noticed something strange. The car parked near the store wasn't empty. There was a figure inside, sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Their face was hard to see through the glare on the windshield, but I could tell they weren't moving. I shook it off, thinking maybe they were just taking a nap. People do weird things on road trips. The gas station was so silent that I could hear the pump clicking as I filled my tank. Just as I finished, I heard a faint noise, a shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet on gravel. I turned toward the car, but the figure was gone. The driver's door was open now, swinging slightly in the breeze. I laughed nervously at myself. "Get a grip," I muttered, climbing back into my car. Maybe they'd gone inside the store, or maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. I was tired after all. I adjusted my rearview mirror and prepared to drive away, but as I reached for the gear shift, something caught my eye. There, in the reflection of the mirror, was a shadowy figure standing by the farthest pump. They weren't moving, just standing there, staring in my direction. A chill ran down my spine. I locked my doors immediately and turned on my headlights. The figure didn't react. They just stood there, like they were waiting for me to do something. I debated what to do. Was this person dangerous? Were they stranded and needed help? Against my better judgment, I cracked my window and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. I leaned forward to get a better look, but as I did, the figure sprinted toward my car. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I threw the car into reverse and slammed the gas pedal. The figure stopped in their tracks, but I wasn't waiting to see what they'd do next. As I sped backward, I saw movement from the corner of my eye. Another figure, this one crawling on all fours, emerged from behind the convenience store. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, panic taking over. I shifted into drive and peeled out of the gas station, my tires screeching on the pavement. But they weren't done with me yet. In my rearview mirror, I saw headlights snap on. A car was chasing me, my heart racing as the car gained on me. I dialed 911 and explained the situation to the operator, my voice shaking. They told me to stay on the line and keep driving toward the nearest town, where an officer would meet me. The headlights stayed on my tail for what felt like an eternity, but just as I approached the first streetlights of a small town, the car veered off the road and disappeared into the darkness. I pulled into a well-lit gas station and waited for the police to arrive. When the officer got there, I gave them a full description of what had happened. They took down the details, nodding as I spoke, but their expression shifted when I described the car that had chased me. "That's strange," the officer said. "We've had reports of a similar vehicle involved in suspicious activity over the past few weeks, but every time we check the plates, they come back unregistered." My stomach sank. "What kind of suspicious activity?" I asked. "Disappearances," he said grimly. "Mostly travelers passing through." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drove straight through to Denver, constantly checking my mirrors for those headlights. I've replayed the events in my head 100 times, trying to make sense of what happened. Maybe it was just a bunch of pranksters messing with me. Maybe it was something much darker. I'll never know for sure. But I do know one thing. I'll never stop at an isolated gas station again, no matter how low my tank gets. This happened about a year ago, late one summer evening in a quiet town in Nebraska. I was on my way back from visiting my mom in the hospital, about a 2-hour drive from my place. Mom had been recovering from a surgery, and I wanted to see her before heading back to my late shift the next day. I was tired, but felt good knowing she was doing okay. That sense of relief must have dulled my usual caution, which is probably why I ended up in this mess. It was a little after midnight when my car's gas light came on. I cursed myself for not filling up earlier. There weren't many options in that part of Nebraska. It was just miles of dark highway and the occasional lone gas station. Lucky for me, I saw a sign for a 24-hour gas station just 2 miles ahead. I figured I'd get gas and maybe grab a coffee to keep me awake. The gas station looked old and run down, like something straight out of a 90s horror movie. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a weird greenish tint over the cracked concrete. There were no other cars in the lot, and inside, I could see a lone cashier scrolling through their phone. I didn't think much of it. It was late, and I'd been to plenty of sketchy places before. As I pumped gas, I heard a faint clattering noise coming from behind the station. It sounded like metal cans being knocked over. My first thought was a raccoon rummaging through trash. But then I heard a low, gruff voice muttering something. The words were too garbled to make out. I paused, my hand gripping the gas nozzle, and scanned the area. The lot was empty, and the shadows beyond the station were thick. Probably the cashier talking to himself, I told myself. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I finished pumping gas and decided to grab a coffee. The station's interior was as grimy as its exterior. Shelves were half-stocked, and the air smelled faintly of mildew. The cashier didn't even look up as I walked in. I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something was off. While paying, I asked the cashier, "Hey, is there someone else here?" I thought I heard voices outside. He looked up, startled, like he hadn't even noticed I was there until I spoke. "Nah, just me," he said flatly, before going back to his phone. I shrugged it off and walked back to my car. I figured I was just tired, hearing things that weren't there. As I opened my car door, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Someone was standing at the edge of the lot near the dumpsters. The figure was tall, wearing what looked like a long coat. I couldn't make out any features in the dim light. "Hey," I called out, half out of instinct. The figure didn't respond, just stood there, completely still. My heart started racing. I got into the car and locked the doors, trying to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a homeless person looking for food. Maybe it was something else. I'd barely started the engine when the figure started walking toward me, slowly at first, then faster. I floored the gas pedal and sped out of the lot. My coffee spilled all over the console, but I didn't care. My only thought was to get as far away as possible. About 5 minutes down the road, my nerves started to settle. I tried convincing myself that it was just some weirdo, harmless but creepy. That's when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A truck was following me, keeping its distance but matching my speed. I told myself it was a coincidence, that it was just another late-night traveler on the highway, but when I turned onto a smaller side road, the truck followed. My chest tightened. I sped up, hoping to lose them, but they sped up too. The headlights grew brighter as the truck closed the distance between us. Then the driver started flashing their high beams over and over. It felt like a threat. My mind raced with possibilities. Did I cut someone off? Was it the guy from the gas station? I saw a sign for a rest area up ahead and decided to pull in. The rest area was lit and had a few cars parked there. I figured whoever was following me wouldn't do anything in a public place. As I pulled into a parking spot, the truck slowed down, then stopped at the entrance to the rest area. For a few agonizing seconds, it just idled there. Then, without warning, it turned around and sped off in the opposite direction. I sat in my car, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a coincidence? A prank? Or was someone really after me? After a few minutes, I decided to report the incident. I called the local sheriff's office and gave them a description of the truck. The dispatcher listened carefully, and then said something that sent chills down my spine. We've had a few reports of a similar truck in the area tonight. One driver said they were forced off the road. Another claimed they were followed to their home. I asked if they'd caught the person, but the dispatcher said they were still looking into it. "If you see the truck again, call us immediately," she said. I drove home that night with my heart pounding the entire way. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even after locking every door and window in my house. For weeks, I kept looking over my shoulder, dreading the sight of those headlights. To this day, I don't know who was driving that truck or what they wanted. Maybe it was just some random creep, or maybe it was something worse. Either way, I've never stopped for gas at an empty station again, and I always make sure my tank is full before a long drive. The world's a lot scarier when you realize how easily things can go wrong. This happened about 6 months ago during a road trip I took to clear my head after a particularly nasty breakup. I'd just packed up my car and decided to head south from Chicago with no set destination in mind. Driving aimlessly felt liberating. No schedules, no one waiting for me to check in. It was just me, the open road, and my favorite playlists. Somewhere in rural Kentucky, my stomach reminded me that I hadn't eaten since breakfast. It was early evening, and the sky was just starting to shift into twilight. I spotted a gas station with a diner attached, the kind of mom-and-pop place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The sign above the diner read, "Mel's Stop and Fuel." It seemed charming in a retro way, so I decided to pull in. The diner was practically empty, except for an elderly couple in the corner booth and a waitress who looked like she'd been on her feet all day. I grabbed a seat at the counter and ordered a burger and fries. As I waited, I noticed the old couple glancing at me and whispering. They weren't being rude exactly, but their curiosity felt strange. The waitress brought my food and asked if I was traveling alone. When I nodded, she gave me a tight smile and said, "Be careful out there. These roads get real dark." Her tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, but I brushed it off. Small-town folks probably just didn't see many strangers passing through. After finishing my meal, I filled up my gas tank and decided to keep driving until I found a motel. The road stretched out in front of me, flanked by dense woods on either side. The sun had fully set, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the thick darkness. That's when I noticed something odd. My car's digital clock, which had been perfectly accurate all day, now showed 3:17 a.m. It didn't make any sense. I'd just left the diner at 8 p.m. I tried fiddling with the settings, but the buttons wouldn't respond. "Weird," I muttered, chalking it up to a glitch. About 20 minutes later, I saw a faint glow in the trees to my right. At first, I thought it was another car, but the light was steady and pale, more like a lantern than headlights. Curious, I slowed down to get a better look. As I peered into the woods, a figure stepped out onto the shoulder of the road. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothing that looked straight out of a Civil War reenactment. He held a lantern in one hand and raised the other to wave at me. His face was obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but something about him felt off. I should have kept driving, but my curiosity got the better of me. I rolled down my window a crack and called out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. Then, in one fluid motion, he turned and walked back into the woods, his lantern light disappearing among the trees. Shaken but determined to get some answers, I pulled over and grabbed my flashlight. I knew it was a bad idea, even as I stepped into the woods, but something about the man, his strange, silent presence, compelled me to follow. The air in the forest was unnaturally still, and my flashlight beam barely seemed to penetrate the thick darkness. After a few minutes, I found a narrow trail and decided to stick to it. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind me. I whipped around, my flashlight trembling in my hand, but there was no one there. The footsteps stopped as soon as I turned, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" No response. I decided I'd had enough and turned back toward my car. That's when I saw him again, standing on the trail ahead of me. This time his lantern was out, and his face was partially illuminated by the beam of my flashlight. His eyes were completely black. I froze, unable to move or even scream. The man tilted his head again, just like before, and then he vanished. 1 second he was there, and the next, the trail was empty. I sprinted back to my car, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I locked the doors and sped off, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. When I reached the next town, I pulled into a motel parking lot and collapsed onto the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, or a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The next morning, I stopped at a coffee shop and decided to look up Mel's Stop and Fuel out of curiosity. The first result made my stomach drop. The gas station had burned down over 20 years ago. According to the article, the fire had started in the diner's kitchen and spread rapidly, trapping several patrons inside. Among the victims was a man who had been seen waving at passing cars with a lantern, trying to get help. To this day, I can't explain what happened. I've told a few friends about it, but most of them just laugh it off or say I must have been overtired. Maybe they're right, but every now and then, I dream about that man with the lantern. His black eyes haunt me, a reminder that some things can't be explained, and that curiosity can be a dangerous thing. If you like these stories, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell to listen to new stories from Mr. Fear every day. Thank you for watching.